The night of March 1945 pressed down on the airfield like a living thing. Cold wind swept across the concrete, carrying the smell of fuel and oil, rattling loose tin and canvas. Floodlights cast long, distorted shadows as American ground crews moved quickly but quietly, as if sound itself might give away the secret. Resting on the tarmac, the aircraft looked wrong to men who had grown up around propellers. Sleek, smooth, silent, Captain Robert Hawk Ellison stood beneath the wing of the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. He was only 24, but his eyes already carried the tired focus of someone who had seen too much sky filled with fire. No prop wash, he said softly, almost to himself. Still feels like cheating. Lieutenant Frank Morales zipped his jacket tighter and glanced toward the dark horizon. Cheating doesn't matter if they shoot us down, he replied. Night flight, unknown defenses, and nobody's supposed to know we're here. Somewhere in the distance, a generator hummed. Tools clinked. A crew chief leaned in close. Fuel's good. Instruments checked twice. You boys keep it smooth on landing, he said, then hesitated. If they even see you coming. The engine spooled up with a rising whine that cut through the night, higher pitched than any piston engine, sharp and unfamiliar. When the jet rolled forward, it did so without the familiar roar of propellers, only a steady, unsettling scream. Within moments, the shooting stars lifted into the darkness, swallowed by cloud and moonless sky. Far to the east, in a Soviet Air Defense Command post, Major Ivan Petrov rubbed his eyes and leaned over a radar console that flickered like a dying candle. His men had been on alert for weeks, tracking German reconnaissance planes and the occasional lost bomber limping home. Then a blip appeared. Contact, the operator said cautiously. High altitude. Fast. Petrov frowned. Ski. The operator adjusted his headset. Faster than expected. Too fast. The blip vanished. A second later, it reappeared closer, much closer. That's impossible, Petrov muttered. No German aircraft moves like that. Searchlights snapped on, across the countryside, stabbing upward in white beams. Anti-aircraft crews spun their guns skyward, waiting for the familiar thunder of engines. Inside the P-80 cockpit, Ellison's instruments glowed a soft green. The jet cut through thin cloud at nearly 500 miles an hour. Below him, light erupted, searchlights sweeping where they thought he would be. Morales' voice crackled in his headset. They're lighting up the sky. Guess we're not invisible after all. Ellison banked left, smooth and fast. Flak bursts bloomed behind them, black flowers tearing open the night. They're aiming ahead of us like we're bombers, Ellison said calmly. We're already past. The jets streaked on, cameras rolling, markers timed. Rail yards, bridges, command hubs passed beneath them in seconds. No bombs fell. This was a test, but every second proved the same terrifying truth. The defenses were reacting to ghosts. Back at the Soviet command post, alarms rang. Reports came in from multiple sectors. No warning, no engine noise until the last moment. Targets overflown before guns could track. Petrov slammed his fist against the map table. Track them again. They're gone, Comrade Major, the operator said, pale. They were here, and then nothing. Minutes later, the sky fell silent once more. On the return flight, Ellison exhaled for the first time since takeoff. His hand shook slightly as the airfield lights came back into view. Frank, he said quietly, if this had been real. Morales didn't let him finish. I know, he replied. They never would have stopped us. The jets touched down just before dawn, tires screeching softly against concrete. Ground crews rushed in, faces tight with a mix of awe and unease. No one cheered. Everyone understood what had just happened. The night had been breached and the future of war had shifted, silently, at jet speed. Morning crept in pale and cold, revealing the airfield in shades of gray. The shooting stars stood where they had landed, streaked with soot and moisture, looking less like experimental machines now and more like harbingers of something new. Ground crews moved around them without their usual chatter, as if instinct warned them to keep their voices low. Captain Ellison sat on an empty crate, helmet resting between his boots. When he finally pulled his gloves off, his hands were still shaking. They never had a chance, he said quietly. A senior colonel nearby didn't respond. He was staring east, toward a horizon that had not fired a shot yet somehow felt more dangerous than any front line. Across that horizon, in the Soviet headquarters hundreds of miles away, Major Ivan Petrov stood before a wall map crowded with pins and greased pencil lines. The night's reports were stacked on the table like accusations. No engine sound until the final seconds. One officer said, speed beyond interception. Another added, radar contact unstable. Inaccurate. Petrov listened, jaw clenched. He had defended cities against the Luftwaffe. He had watched German bombers burn in searchlight beams. This had been different. This was not a German aircraft, Petrov said at last. And not an accident. Silence followed. Within days, engineers were summoned. Radar technicians tore apart equipment, recalibrating systems that suddenly felt decades old. Fighter commanders demanded faster aircraft. Politicians demanded answers that did not yet exist. The conclusion, unspoken but universally understood, settled over the room like smoke. The war had outgrown its defenses. Back at the American base, the mission was filed under layers of classification. There were no photographs released, no press briefings, no medals pinned. The pilots were told only this: you did what you were sent to do. Say nothing. Ellison returned to flying conventional missions as the war ground toward its end. But every time he heard the cough of a piston engine, it sounded obsolete. The skies he now imagined were faster, quieter, and far more unforgiving. Years later, uniforms changed and alliances hardened. Soviet factories began producing jet fighters of their own. Radar towers multiplied. Missiles replaced guns. The memory of that night of blips appearing and vanishing, of defenses reacting too late, haunted planning rooms on both sides of a widening divide. Petrov, older now, stood once more beneath the night sky. Jets passed overhead, unseen but unmistakable in their speed. We prepared for the last war, he said to a young officer beside him. And paid for it in fear. Ellison, half a world away, watched contrails carve pale lines across the blue sky. He thought of Morales, of the searchlights, a flag bursting harmlessly behind them. He wrote later in a private journal, we crossed the line without firing a shot. Not into enemy territory but into the future. The war ended soon after. Parades were held. Medals were awarded. Yet the most important lesson of that night was never celebrated, because it carried a warning that courage could master the skies, but technology could outrun wisdom. That every breakthrough made the next war faster, deadlier, and harder to stop. And that sometimes, the most decisive battles are fought in silence when no one knows they are already losing.